If they look subpar to this, then I'll combine them. But I always love to winter them like this if I can, because then I have 4 queens in one box that I can push into next. And think about it, like you know, the people who have gone before me with this type of management. You have your own queens in April and May. You don't have to call Oliveras or Better Bee, or you know, they're right there, and they're your own, and they're vetted. They've already proven them, so they've gone through one winter already. They're better than anything you could buy on the market, unless someone else can tell you, I'll sell you one of these for like 50 bucks or whatever they're going to tell you. You know what I mean? They're not going to give them away. So, anyways, we keep pushing. This is what those combs look like. Has anyone? Most of you guys have you seen this? Is anyone that's really familiar? I mean, this is nothing new. I remember when about 2007, 2006, you know, this type of management, queen rearing in this part of the world was still kind of, there's only a few people that were really doing it. So when people would come around and talk about all this, it would be like brand new for a lot of people. But I'm glad that it's not new, because it's nice to encourage other beekeepers to do this. Picture of a queen. I like to mark them just to track longevity. So again, as we go on, the whole thing here with what it takes to be a good, what makes a good beekeeper. Discernment, that's one thing I really kind of grafted onto, was I could tell when I was just getting involved in beekeeping, someone who could open up, it was like almost like they were just somehow like a wizard, or so they had some magic power to open up something, and just through a quick observation they could tell me what's going on. Like, whoa, how do you get there? I want that kind of beekeeping ability, right? And it was almost like it was like watching an artist paint a picture. How they worked the hive. They took their hive tool and just got to the comb, they picked out the frame, there wasn't this, you know, the bees weren't really agitated. It was just like, there was, and someone who's just getting started, you got your gloves on, you're squishing 20, 30 of them here, they're starting to sting the crap out of you, you know, you got to smoke the crap out of them. And it was just like this kind of like, it's like you're out of step with the bees, you don't know how to dance with them yet, right? And someone who's really got the discerning ability with bees, you know how much you smoke, you don't even know when you don't need to smoke. And most of the time you use hardly any smoke, if you really even need to. And it's like you can dance, it's like this dance. It's like you know kind of what you're doing. So yeah, that's the whole thing. With being discerning, you don't draw conclusions too soon on things you don't know the answers to. There's a lot of things I just kind of keep on the shelf. I'll kind of put a little thought in there sometimes if I can draw more of a conclusion than last time if I have open questions, especially around, you know, being that I'm not treating, I'm seeing bees do things I never saw. Not that I have, again, I don't have magical bees. Other beekeepers in the state of Vermont who are treatment-free are seeing the same things. And I'm pretty sure other beekeepers who are conventional are seeing the same things, especially if they're good beekeepers, or, you know, they raise their own stock, they're seeing the same things. But, you know, the whole notion of, I remember getting going, but now I never saw bees like uncap and cap pupa before. That's kind of new to me. If you guys are familiar with that concept, it's nothing, again, it's been in a lot of the literature lately in the last few years, but starting to see more and more, you know, you'll have pupa, that's the white-eyed or purple-eyed stage, and the bees will come in and cap it, and then, like, literally overnight, they'll cap it over again. So it's like, what's going on there? I don't know, you know, is it hygienic? I can't, you know, or is it, you know, I don't know. I'm not a scientist, I'm a beekeeper, so I try not to get too scientific about things. I just like to, I like to tell people, this is what I'm observing. I'm just drawing conclusions to what I observe. So becoming a good dietitian, and just becoming really good with observation. What do you look at? And why? When you open a beehive, if you can keep track of your thoughts, what are you looking for? What are you kind of like? What are you looking at when you open the beehive? Are you looking? Do you have already kind of like a predisposed kind of object you're looking at, or are you just going to open it up and just kind of say, what do you see? What is going on? What's changed? What's similar? Kind of let the bees draw your focus to a thing. You know, if there's something to be found. Does that make sense to you guys? Sometimes it's like, all right, I want to go find the queen, right? If your whole thing is open the hive and find the queen, all you're going to do is look for the queen. You're going to miss out on all the other things that are going on. You're going to miss out on the grooming. You're going to miss out on the bee packing pollen in with her head and, you know, brushing it off on her pollen basket. You're going to miss them off transferring, you know, nectar from one bee to the next, or communicating with their antennae and you know, all this stuff. We might miss them, like, you know, chewing on some wax to make into comb or whatever. It's all this is happening if you look for it. You know, it's not all. It should. If it's happening now, then I'd say yes. You've got a beehive that's really ahead of the schedule. But again, within the season. What's that?
He said they're the new snow dating bees.
Yeah, exactly. Good observation, that's one thing. I know good beekeepers, their observation, like we're talking about, is just it's on that. The other thing, like I mentioned, we touched base with just the environment. Are you guys, those of you who've been in bees, isn't it? Do you guys find it's really kind of fun? You kind of feel in tune? All right, usually at about the first week of April, you start to see the first signs of pollen. If we have an early spring, it's the last week of March. Sometimes it's the second to the last week of March. I think I had it written in 2016 was the last really early spring we had. I saw the bees bringing in pollen. I think it was on like the 12th or 13th of March. It was really early. And if you guys remember that at all, see, again, I don't know about you, but if I don't write stuff down, I forget about how last year was, right? All I know is that it's like everything's trending this way. It's like, well, no, actually last winter was quite cold. But how, it hasn't been, it's not like it used to be every winter. It's just kind of predictable. This is the way it is. It's this and it's this and it's this. So you do have a the unpredictable aspect of what it is now to live in where we live, where we winters aren't the same and summers are wet and you never know what we're getting. So a good beekeeper knows the environment, knows their environment, knows their flora and fauna, and kind of how to prepare for it. And that's what I like to term as the dance. Like if you know your flora and fauna well enough, and you can see kind of things ebbing and flowing, and you see all your fruit trees, your stone fruit, pears, plums, and your apples, they're all coming out of bloom. When you think what comes into bloom next, all you got to do is look at the edges of the field. What's coming into bloom next. Usually, some point a few weeks after that, by the end of March, in early June, you'll have honeysuckle. And the dandelion's kind of under. It's really the big dandelion flows happen in there, but out of the dandelion, you have honeysuckle. So if you've got a lot of honey that's being brought in on the bees on dandelion, and you see the honeysuckle starting to pop, just starting to bud, it's like, all right, think about, all right, the thing is, you never know what the potential, what the actual reality of anything is. You kind of think of the potential, and then the reality is you become kind of used to being, having your expectations, fall short all the time sometimes, right? It's like, well, that didn't amount to a hill of beans. It's hardly anything on that one. But a good beekeeper knows the flows. And this is another thing, again, it's just, a good beekeeper, I think, in time we should be able to sustain our bees. We should be able to kind of be very, once in a great while, if we get the bad year, we should, call up Joe Schmo for some bees, but we should be good at sustaining our own little aviaries. And I say that with humility, right? I'm not thinking that we're all, again, but there should be someone who's been at this long enough, and I say this to myself, if I was doing this and if I had to buy all my replacement bees from someone else, you wouldn't be looking at me right before you did. There's no way I could do that. That's not happening. Especially with the paradigm I'm running. If I was doing this treatment free and I had to, well, I guess if I had inheritance, if some family before me left me a bunch of money, I just wasted money, and I could say, well, yeah, I'm a beekeeper, but I'm spending all my grandpappy's money on bees, Well, if that's the reality, then I don't think I'd say you're not, you've got to be careful, because that's going to run out, and then you probably have to move to Hawaii to save your reputation or something. But anyways, that's another story. And I say that with you because I always tell people I might not be here next year. I might not be here in April. If I lose everything, we'll see what happens. So, how do we sustain our bees? And this is another thing I wanted to tie into. It's a mindset to the future that the next generation, when it comes to fixing our current bee problems, and this is what gets really kind of a hot topic. This whole idea of what are we doing? How we really what is the current paradigm of just do A plus B in a sense? If we're so reliant upon the chemical inputs, is that really a solution for tomorrow? Is it really a solution? Is it just become? Are we? And again, this is what it comes down to. There's a lot of relative to this. If your thought process is yes, it is the solution. So if it is the solution, then you really have to be invested heavily into coming up with the next big fix to keep mites at bay. Because again, like I mentioned, does any of you guys go to Appomondia back in September in Montreal? Anyone else? So if I start...
She's not here.
Oh, she's not. Because I went up to Montreal and I went to Appomondia and I sat in on a few of the classes or a few of the lectures. And it was amazing. There's so much, I don't want to put too much hype on this. There's a lot of concern in the field where there's no new chemistries developed right now for the next big conventional miticide. Outside of Amitraz, and a few other the ones like if all of a sudden we see a huge resistance built up in the mites to Amitraz, a lot of the conventional guys are really going to be hard pressed to keep mites down. They're going to have to start looking at the organic methods, which are hard for bigger operations because the organic ones there's more temperature variance. It requires you to kind of treat when you don't have time to treat. Oxalic acid seems to work for a lot of people, but again, and it's not. I would agree that oxalic acid, some of the organic, like based upon formic and oxalic acid, it's much harder for the mites to develop resistance to the organic acids because of the nature of the acid and how the mites have a hard time developing a resistance, more so than the conventional miticides like Amitraz and is it Kumapos? Kumapos is the biggest one. Check mite. What's the active ingredient in that?
That's Kumapos in the fluvalinate still on the market too.
Yeah, fluvalinate.
Still in the catalog.
Yeah, but again, I mean, it's like that. Thankfully, those are the ones that are kind of we've exhausted their resources pretty quick, years ago. But again, so what are we to do? I like how it was said, the mindset is don't do something today, or don't do something today what someone else can do for you tomorrow. That's the mindset I think we adopt as people sometimes. So for those of us who are brave enough, or whatever you want to call it, crazy enough, maybe it's out of being kind of haphazard, just making a mistake, we realize, well, there is another way. We don't have to do this. We don't have to just kind of go along. That's my whole thing. Is like I always like to think, as personally as a beekeeper, if I don't have to be so dependent on mite, every year to treat for mites, and I come to a point where it's no longer, and I am realistic about this. If there's a time where I need to treat because it's clear that I'm losing everything, then I will be ready to make that decision if I need to. But I like to think that I'd like to go as long as I absolutely can without having to. Because I feel like the mindset that's developed around not treating is like I've proven to myself year after year that I really don't need to right now. I don't need to. And if I don't need to, why would I? Instead of jumping on the bandwagon, well, I don't want to lose them, so I'm just going to do it anyways. Does that make sense to you guys? And I think it's again, the secret to all this is it's a mindset. If you don't believe in something, you're not going to do it. Like I believe that I don't need to treat. That I do believe that a beekeeper of what I'm doing with raising queens and the size of the acre I maintain, I do not need to treat my bees. If you're doing this on a smaller scale, I don't have much suggestion for a hobby beekeeper. That's why I would say be critical, be kind of, I'm always, what's the word? I'm always a skeptic of everything I do. So I would suggest to be the smart way to approach is be a skeptic of what you're doing. Prove yourself, try to prove yourself wrong. And if you can continue to prove yourself right and try to prove yourself wrong, then you're on the right track. I always find people set themselves up for failure if they think that they're going to try to, they kind of got this big lofty idea and they're always falling short of it. And then you're always never arriving at a solution because your idea is not even in reality. You know what I mean? It's like this, it's not proven yet. But if you can say, you know what, it's a nice idea, but let's work to get there. I'm really going to be a skeptic all the while, because then I'm not going to be deceived along the way, when things aren't going my way. So anyways, that's my whole thing. Like, was how do we move into the next kind of generation, if you will, with beekeeping, and can we arrive at viable solutions? And I think we will. I mean, we will, right? We're in this together. I feel like I've been doing this just long enough now, where it's like it's hard to kind of sit quiet and just kind of let people say that, oh, this is the way it's got to be. And it's like, no, I've kind of been sitting quiet doing it this way for a decade now, and it's working. And if anything, I have an apiary that's built up upon, it's far better than it was 10 years ago. And I think any honest beekeeper or farmer will tell you that they don't know what tomorrow brings. Like I said, every year we start back at zero. So we can't boast about anything about being here, indefinitely. But it's like, well, it's working today, it worked last year, let's try it again next year. So I think that's how we take it, a step at a time. And you guys have any comments, anything to add? Go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, queen rearing, you stressed queen rearing, you've taught me that last summer. You need to be raising your own queens, and I'm about to make that step. I have my queens ordered from Troy.
And I would say with queen rearing too, I mean, if you're intrigued with the whole aspect of queen rearing, if you've been in bees for a while now and you're always thinking about it, it's like, well, I'll do it this year and this year never happens. I'm always pushing those people. Just do it. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. You're going to make them. You're probably going to make a big mess of everything, but you're going to learn and you'll get real good at it real quick. Sometimes some people won't get good at it real quick at all. They'll realize it's not meant for them. And most people, I think, will realize you can do it, and it's very achievable, and it's not really. It's kind of like calculus. You know, I'm not going for it. I'm not very good at math, but a lot of people who are say once you get calculus, it's like riding a bike. It's like, that's great. sounds great, right? But go ahead. Question.
Just about how often do you requeen? Is it something you do regularly, or just when it's needed?
Great question. So, being that I have over, I usually have a couple hundred nukes that I keep for myself. If I have, well, let's say, it depends on my mortality rate. If like last year I had a very low mortality rate, so I have a lot of queens now that are alive and they're going to be pushed into the next season. So traditionally, I do requeen. I requeen queens once they get into the third, fourth year in the honey-producing colonies, because those queens are usually the ones that are not producing as much, and they're always the ones that are going to give me. If I have a 3-year-old queen that goes into the winter, usually that 3-year-old queen now coming into her 4th season, usually superseded in March, and you have a queenless hive in April. You ever seen that before? So you have an older queen, she fails because they really start to ramp up brood rearing. So yes, I do like to requeen the ones. I don't requeen everything. I like to breed for longevity. So I like to have queens, prove themselves to me. If I can have a 3-year-old queen that's just as productive as she was when she was in her 1st season, I've had a few queens make it to 5 years. And again, if I was just requeening everything, I wouldn't know. I wouldn't see that. I wouldn't be able to see those things. So I like to breed for longevity. Hence, I don't requeen everything every year. The honey-producing colonies, I manage parts of the apiary differently. The honey-producing colonies, I like to have young 3-year-old queens of the old. I look at the honey-producing queens as my potential breeder queens too. So I'm not quick to requeen them too quickly, especially if I have a 3-year-old queen. I'm like, well, if she makes it through the next year, I'm gonna use her as a breeder queen. And if she doesn't make it, then okay, well, she doesn't make it. So some of those 3-year-old queens, I like to, put them on ice over winter in the colony, and if they're there next spring, I'll use them as breeders. Or if clearly, most of the times, the queens are undesirable, the bees supersede naturally on their own. Since I mark everything, usually a nice marked queen goes away, and you have an unmarked queen, or they swarm. You'll have a nice unmarked queen again. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. So, but if you're raising resistant queens, it seems like if you did it more often, you'd get more.
Oh, requeening?
Yeah, more resistant.
Well, so the way that the whole apiary works too. So if I lose, if 15 to 20% of my apiary in an average year is being replaced with new queens anyways, because I'm replacing all my deadouts with my own nukes, which are coming from last year's breeders, which were proven that everything's kind of proving itself. And if I have a percentage, and if the honey producing colonies, if those queens are now 2 years old, and they had big populations the previous season, and they're not dying, and they're able to, and I'm not treating them. It's all built in. I don't have to do a lot of guessing because the bees they're really doing a lot of the weightlifting for me. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's great.
It's like I'm not wondering, which ones are not resistant, because if they're not resistant, they're dead. They don't live. They're pretty quick.
That's the nature criteria. They're alive, right?
Exactly. Yeah. I like how Michael Palmer says it. I like bees that live. I like bees that make it in the winter. The ones that look good in the fall, that's great, but they need to look good in the spring to count, right?
Yeah.
Jeff. I'll go to Jeff and I'll come to.
Here's the second part of my question. How viable is it for some of this hobbyists with just 3 hives to go treatment-free without the queen rearing program in place that you have?
I don't know.
They're going to,
How viable is it? You guys hear Jeff's question? How viable is it?
I'm sure we all want to be treatment-free. I can save all that money on Formic Pro and oxalic acid.
I'd say there is an aspect to be responsible, and again, be a skeptic at the same time. I'd like to think, it is possible to be a small-scale beekeeper and do this without treatments. I wouldn't want to just jump in as a new beekeeper without some serious mentorship from someone who already has gone before you. Otherwise, you're just gonna be, again, you'd be making, and it's really your story too. If you're convicted from the beginning and you know little, you just want to jump in without, you're going to be buying a lot of bees every year. And you're going to have a lot of people in the beekeeping community tell you you're really being, you need to start treating because you're mite bombing everyone else's bees or whatever. There's, you're being irresponsible, whatever the things that are thrown on you. And I think to some degree you have to consider what's being said. And if there's some truth to it, then you've got to kind of start to say, all right, so maybe we need to throw some organic treatments on the bees so we can get this figured out where we're not just losing bees every year. Because if you are losing bees every year as a treatment-free beekeeper, then something's not right. You need to have, again, a good beekeeper has something that's sustaining itself. And if you can do that, my humble answer to the question is that before I stopped treating, I had about 50 colonies, and at that point I was using Apogard in August. And when I realized that, okay, hey, I've been doing this for a while now. I've raised my own queens. I got nukes going into the winter along with all these other colonies, so I have numbers to play with a little bit. That's when I felt like, all right, I'm ready to not do this. I'm going to just take everything off the chemical treadmill and just let things go about their way. So is there a right way to go about it? No, I think it just takes your conviction. And again, just being above reproach with other beekeepers who are kind of like always coming at you. And if you really have nothing else to say, then no, I think you've got to be responsible. And if you can say, well, this is what I'm doing to be responsible as a result of not treating, then it's like, then you can just tell people to shut up and mind their own business. Question?
Have you heard of a place called Spikenard?
Spikenard?
Spikenard. Yeah, down through
Oh,
the south.
It sounds familiar, yeah.
And they have a very, very impressive organization which uses no treatments.
Okay.
And they have courses run and they're teaching for small and larger scale.
In Virginia,
Virginia.
but you realize they're
Oh,
starting
okay.
in Iowa or
Yeah.
Illinois and all
Yep.
these guys
Hunter
are
Hop, yeah.
surrounded by big ag.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's the
That's the whole
balance there.
question, but we don't have too much big
Yeah.
ag.
We have very little big ag around here. We're very fortunate. With Virginia, there's a lot of corn in Virginia still being grown also.
You have a question?
So I'm thinking that people who don't keep hundreds of hives, there's other things that they can do that are harder to do when you are large scale, perhaps,
Yes.
like drone brood removal. I bet you
Yep.
don't do that.
Oh yeah, that's right. I mean, there's all these things I forget because
The
it's
things
not on
about
my
the
radar.
racks and the comb and
Yep.
maybe going foundationless.
The whole notion of integrated pest management, right?
Right.
I like to, it's amazing. It's this term that a lot of farmers use, a lot of beekeepers use, but they nod their hat to it, but they pay lip service to IPM and they really don't do anything. They just say, well, I counted mites in one hive and one hive overseeded the threshold, so we just treated the whole hive. Well, did you go through all the bees and find out which ones that didn't need to be treated?
Right.
That's real IPM. That's a lot of work.
That's what I did.
A lot of farmers just say, oh yeah, I've got a hive pest problem. Well, how do you know what about the ones that don't? And again, I say this with humility because at the end of the day, the work's got to get done and there's only a window of time to do everything, so you just got to get it done. I know all about that. But it's amazing though how a lot of people just kind of say things they don't realize, well, and I do the same thing. We just say things, we kind of don't really, we just pay lip service to stuff and we don't really understand much. But yes, there's a lot of stuff I kind of forget about, but trapping drones, if you're just, on the premise of just making splits usually alone, having a good regimen at the time of year when and how to make splits effectively so you break that mite cycle and you know that the bees are going to be ahead of the mites a little bit for the rest of the season. You can cage queens. Actually, that's one thing I had done a few years ago, just by happenstance. I had a few extra queens, so I took 1 yard of 18 colonies, and I went through the whole yard, and I requeened the whole yard, because I had all these queens, and I didn't have a home for them, so like, well, I'm just going to put them back in the apiary. I went to 1 bee yard, I pinched all the queens in every colony, and I put a new laying queen under a screen. You guys probably have heard of this for some of you, but the queen sat under that screen, the pushing screen, for 2 weeks, and this was on the 16th of June. That I did this. She was under there, so I came back 2 weeks later. She's got a little, bed of eggs laid under there, and some of the nurse bees are under there now taking care of her. I released the screens. Every single, I think out of 18 colonies or whatever, I think only like 2 really failed throughout the winter, and they had these big populations of bees. So what happened? What did I do? Essentially, I interrupted the brood cycle for a 2-week period in June. If I was to delay that, if I did that like on the main honey flow for me for the basswood or linden, if I did it on the 4th of July week and into the 2nd week of July, I think it would have been better timing for the mite cycles, because it's a little bit kind of right before the mites kind of really kind of get out of control, and it would have pushed it into the fall a little bit better. But that's a thing that I don't have time to fuss with either. But if I was doing this on a smaller scale, it would be fun to just say, you know what, instead of putting the chemicals in August, I'm just going to trap my queens for 2 weeks, and that usually it's amazing how a little goes a long way sometimes, especially if you already have good genetics, you have good stock to play with to begin with. The bees really just need a little bit of, sometimes all they need is just a little bit of help to kind of really just have them, get into the next season. And they don't need the huge kind of like shot in the arm that the chemicals would give them for help, in the sense of help that everyone's so dire to jump on board with. I wanted to kind of show, you guys have any other picture, any questions?
Yeah.
Oh, the extracting the honey thing, it was pretty intense this year. I don't have a big, this is big from, just one extractor, but for commercial, it's nice, I always tell people, I'm not out to conquer the world with some bee empire. I just want to embrace my family. I don't want to have to hire anybody, because I hate managing people. And so I'd like to do most people tell you with bees around here, if they're doing this, it's nice to be kind of just big enough and small enough. And it's nice to have something there at the end of the day. It's like, wow, I can do this. It's nice. I was amazed at this year how I could step back and be like, wow, I can't believe I'm here. 14 years ago, I never would have thought that I could do this. It's happening. So it's very rewarding. At the same time, it's very real to think that, I feel extremely vulnerable every fall. I wrote a little blog. I don't really do much on the internet, but I wrote a little blog about how every fall I feel very nervous. I'm always worried, I'm going to lose everything. I'm going to have to get a real job somewhere. And every spring I'm amazed that, okay, yep, I think I'll do it again. And I think I'll do it again. And it's amazing because some people think you're nuts to work in an environment as a farmer like that. It's like, well, that's the reality everyone is in. If you work for somebody else, what happens is your boss just gives you the notice, and you say, well, you're done, or here's your 2-week notice. The reality is that there's no real 100% assurance anywhere, because we're all going to die someday. That's a guarantee. And our jobs are never secure because we live in a world where there's a lot of variables that are unknown. So I think as Americans, we live in this world of like, oh, we're just going to steady upward trends all the way into the future. I'm going to retire at 65 and go to Florida and play golf. Wrong. What if that doesn't happen? And if my mind is so fragile that everything's banked on that for happiness and peace and success, whoa, then you've got a cliff in front of you. Got to be prepared for. So, anyways, I can get off on rabbit trails. So, if you guys have any questions, queens, maybe the queens are nice. What's that? Go ahead.
What's your opinion of using a single brood box?
I think it's great, in my humble opinion, yes. If you can manage, if I don't have, I've been intrigued by it because I like the idea that it's in one box, and in the fall, when you get them into the winter, it's in one box, you can lift stuff easily, you can move it around, and it's very possible. We live in, with the number of nukes that I winter in one box, if you were to take all the big colonies and get them down into one, what's Ian Stepler, I think it's the guy, the Canadian beekeeper, has really pushed this, whole winter in, because since he's done that for a long time and saying, showing people, I got to get them into cold storage, and I got to condense everything down for the sake of space to store them. It's possible. I think you got to, as a beekeeper, really, you've got to take what he has kind of shown, or he's not the only one, he's not the one who invented it, but we got to somehow adapt that management to our environment.
Yeah, I think the trick of it is to get supers on early.
Yep.
You give them room to expand, otherwise they'll swarm.
Yeah, just to be, because that's what he does, right? He gets them up into 2 or 3,
Yep.
to kind of alleviate the swarming, and right before his main, so the thing he has that we don't have is canola. He has an intense honey flow that keeps him just occupied all summer long. So he can start to condense the brood nest below, below one queen excluder, and then everything's backfilled, and he's got all that honey on him. Or I don't know what you guys have here. It's probably similar to what I'm seeing, but we have in an average year, it's kind of like an intense spring flow, and it kind of levels off to kind of being a mild honey flow, and it goes into another intense summer flow, and then it just kind of stops. And if anything, is a dearth, between the middle of August and or the middle of July and about the middle of August. And then if you get goldenrod, you'll get the fall flow. So there is like a sometimes almost it feels like a 3-week window in the summer, late summer, where there's not much coming in, and I think that would impact how you get your bees into one box.
How do you actually determine the flow?
How do I?
Bees are coming around my hive all the time.
Yep.
They're carrying in pollen and they're doing this and that.
Yep.
Is it what they're putting up and the weight in the
Yeah,
hive?
how the amount of surplus food they're putting away. In regards, particularly honey is an easy one to measure a honey flow by, right? How quickly they draw wax. If you put foundations in, and then the second you put a foundation, you come back another day, the next day to look, and they're already drawing it out, or it's already drawn out. You're in the middle of a honey flow. And yeah, how productive they are. They're building, that white virgin comb, at the top, and the burr comb filled with honey. That's all the signs of a honey flow. Question.
What's the smallest kind of clusters you're overwintering?
Did you guys remember those pictures of the 4-way mating nukes?
Yeah.
They're in one box. So they're small clusters individually. They're probably no bigger than, if you just took this book, have you guys got this yet? It's a good book.
Yeah.
So if you just took this book, maybe if you took it, I don't know, if you took a cluster, like a 3D cluster, they're probably like this big.
Yeah.
And they're in quarter little sections in the box. But
Right.
the thing is, together they come and form. So the smallest cluster would probably be a cluster on 4 combs, 4 standard deep combs.
Okay.
And that's probably 3.5 frames of bees,
And
maybe
so,
3 frames.
because we were taught, I was taught to have, 2 bees and a medium and a super, on it. And it's like all that equipment out there all year, and it seems like there's a small cluster of bees in there, and the rest are cold. The rest of it's cold space,
Yep.